Hey there, Jane Reaction here, and I'm coming at you with another Technical Tuesday. I'm not going to sing the jingle this week because no one needs to hear that. All right, today I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about having proper hip and pelvic positioning. Shakira likes to say that hips don't lie, and it's true, they don't. But they are very important parts to the entire lumbopelvic hip complex, and having proper hip and pelvis positioning can help prevent, most importantly, back injuries. So a lot of times when you feel strain on your back, a lot of it can be results of having improper pelvic tilt. So when we talk about pelvic tilt, we sort of think of our pelvis and our pelvic bone as a giant bowl of water. And so usually what you want to think about is you want to make sure that bowl of water doesn't spill out forward or back. So if I were doing, for example, an anterior pelvic tilt, you can think about the whole pelvis tipping forward, water spilling out of your navel. And see how my butt sticks out when I have an anterior pelvic tilt? That's sort of what's going on there. You're sticking your butt out, and I can feel this strain on my lower back. Now the converse is that if I tuck my hips under, you'll hear people say tuck your hips under, but if I do that too much, I've sort of erased a lot of the curvature from my spine, and I've got this weird knee bend thing, and I sort of look funky. So that is an example of a posterior pelvic tilt. So you're tipping that pelvis back, dumping the water out behind you. So when you're looking for a neutral spine, you basically want to get somewhere in the middle. You're not sticking your butt out and putting pressure on your low back. You're not tucking your hips under so much that you're looking strange. So you just want to find a nice neutral position in between. And finding that neutral position is going to be key. It's important to think about it as you're doing squats, bending over, things like that, all sorts of positions. It's always nice to just do a check with your pelvis, whether you're kneeling or standing or sitting, and just saying, am I sticking my butt out? Am I feeling pressure there? Or am I tucking under too much? Or am I neutral? Another way to think about pelvic tilt is the common cue is headlights. Okay, so if I'm doing an anterior pelvic tilt, if I'm sticking my butt out and tipping my pelvis forward, I can think of those head beams as like pointing down towards the ground. Whereas the opposite, if I tuck my hips under, those head beams sort of go up. So you always think about when having your head beams level. Good for driving a car too. All right. The other tip that you want to think about when it comes to your pelvis or your hips, remember those headlights. So you want to make sure that they're always pointing forward or ahead of you. And we call that keeping your hips square. Okay, so what is an example of not keeping your hips square? Well, usually it will involve some sort of rotation in the hip area. A very classic example is that if you go to do a leg raise, some people want to try to get a larger range of motion. They want to look at how high I can raise my leg out to the side. But really what they're doing is they're turning their hip out to try to get that extra range of motion. So when you're doing something like a lateral leg lift, you want to think about keeping your hips square and forward and just raising your leg out to the side while keeping your hips square. Notice my range of motion is decreased, and that will most likely happen unless you're extremely flexible in that way. And that's totally normal, but unless you're directed otherwise, always think about keeping the hips square. So that comes, for lateral walks, keeping the hips square. And also, for example, if you were on all fours like doing side leg lifts, again, sometimes you tip to the side to try to get a higher range of motion, but you want to think about keeping your torso parallel to the ground, keeping your hips square, and just raising your leg out to the side. And again, notice my range of motion is decreased because I'm keeping my hips square. So these are just two very simple cues that you'll hear me say a lot in my classes. And it's just something that you should always think about in the back of your head, especially as you progress, through the reps of the movement as you start to fatigue. You might notice you start to feel more strain in your back and your butt starts to stick out, especially for a lot of overhead movements. If the weight's too heavy, you'll start to push your butt out. So always wanting to fight those tendencies and just doing a check-in to make sure that your posture is correct, and that will help prevent a lot of back injuries, especially lower back injuries in the future. So that's it for Technical Tuesday. It's a fast one. I'll see you next week. Take care, stay healthy, stay safe.